The transport ship landed with a heavy thud on the dusty surface of Kepler 438b. Hanaul Kim grabbed his equipment bags and stepped out into the orange-tinted air. The wind howled across the barren landscape, carrying tiny particles that stung. His face, despite his protective mask. "Welcome to hell," said Commander Ji-won Park, walking up to greet him. She wore the standard colony uniform, but Hanaul could see the stress lines around her eyes. "Hope you brought sunscreen. The radiation here will cook you in an hour without proper gear." Hanaul nodded and followed her toward Research Station Omega-7. The building looked like a metal box dropped from space, which it basically was. Solar. Panels covered every surface, and thick walls promised protection from the deadly environment outside. "So you're here to study the bugs," Ji-won said as they walked through the airlock. "Most people think you're crazy. We've got real problems on this world, and you want to look at insects." "The Vorthak aren't just insects," Hanaul replied, setting down his bags in the small room that would be his home for the next 6 months. "The preliminary reports show they have complex social structures. They might be more intelligent than we think." Ji-won laughed. "Tell that to the miners. Those things get into everything. Eat through metal cables, mess up the equipment. Some folks want to gas the whole planet and start fresh." Hanaul felt his stomach turn. He had read about such suggestions in the colony reports. The Vorthak were seen as pests, nothing more. But the data he had studied suggested something very different. The next morning, Hanaul suited up and ventured outside for his first real look at the native life. Dr. Minho Lee, his research partner, joined him with a cart full of scanning equipment. "They come out mostly at dawn and dusk," Minho explained as they walked toward a rocky outcrop. "During the day, they hide underground. The radiation is too strong even for them." As if summoned by his words, a small creature scuttled across their path. Hanaul stopped and knelt down slowly. The Vorthak was about the size of a house cat, with a crystalline shell that sparkled in the morning light. 6 legs moved in perfect coordination, and 2 antenna-like appendages twitched as it sensed the air. "Beautiful," Hanaul whispered. The creature paused and turned toward him. For a moment, they looked at each other across the vast gulf between species. Then it chirped once and disappeared between the rocks. "They do that," Minho said. "Always watching us. Makes some people nervous." Over the following days, Hanaul learned to track the Vorthak movements. They lived in vast underground networks, connected by tunnels that stretched for kilometers. The adults worked together to gather food and maintain their homes, but it was the nurseries that fascinated him most. Deep. Underground, protected by layers of rock and crystal, the Vorthak kept their young. Hundreds of larvae grew in carefully tended chambers. The adults took turns guarding them, bringing food, and maintaining the perfect temperature and humidity. "They're not just breeding," Hanaul told Ji-won during his first weekly report. "They're planning. Look at these tunnel patterns. They're building deeper, reinforcing the chambers. They know something we don't." Ji-won studied the maps he had created. "Maybe they're just expanding. Population growth." "No," Hanaul shook his head. "This is preparation. They're getting ready for something bad." He didn't have to wait long to find out what. The alert came at 3 in the morning. Hanaul jerked awake as sirens wailed throughout the station. Red lights flashed in the corridors as he stumbled toward the control room. "Solar flare," announced Dr. Soman Choi, the station's weather specialist. She pointed at the screens showing angry spikes of radiation data. "Big one, Class X-28. It's going to hit us in 18 hours. Everyone to the shelter," Ji-won ordered. "This is not a drill. We'll be underground for at least 3 days." But Hanaul wasn't thinking about the human shelter. He was thinking about the Vorthak nurseries. Those underground chambers were deep, but not deep enough for this kind of radiation storm. The larvae couldn't survive it. "I need to check something," he said, grabbing his equipment. "Are you insane?" Ji-won blocked his path. "Nobody goes outside before a Class X flare. You'll be dead in minutes." "The portable shield generators," Hanaul said urgently. The ones we use for emergency shelters. How many do we have? 12. Maybe 15. Why? Hanul was already moving toward the equipment storage. I need them all. It took precious time to convince Jiwon to let him take the shields, even more time to load them onto a transport cart, and suit up in the heaviest radiation gear the station had. By the time he reached the first Vorthak nursery site, the radiation levels were already climbing. Adult Vorthak scattered as he approached their tunnel entrance. They chittered and clicked at each other in obvious distress. Some tried to block his path, but when they saw the equipment he carried, they backed away. Hanul worked like a man possessed. He lowered shield generators down into the tunnels, positioning them to create overlapping fields of protection around the nursery chambers. His radiation meter clicked faster and faster as the storm approached. The Vorthak adults watched him with growing confusion. This strange creature was risking its life for their young. They began to help, carrying the generators deeper into the tunnels, following his gestures and instructions, despite having no common language. By the time the flare hit, Hanul had protected 4 major nurseries. He collapsed in exhaustion just inside the last tunnel as the radiation storm began. The world above became a hellscape of deadly energy, but deep underground, thousands of Vorthak larvae slept safely. For 3 days, Hanul remained in the tunnels. The adult Vorthak brought him water and food, strange crystalline substances that somehow provided everything his body needed. They tended to his equipment and kept the shield generators running. When the storm finally passed, Hanul emerged to find the entire station in panic. They thought he was dead. Commander Jiwon nearly cried with relief when she saw him walking across the scorched landscape. "You crazy fool," she said, helping him out of his radiation suit. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Hanul looked back toward the tunnel entrances, where small crystalline heads were beginning to peek out. Adult Vorthak emerged slowly, testing the air, checking on their young. In the distance, he could hear the soft chirping sounds that meant the larvae had survived. "I saved them," he said simply. What he didn't know was that his actions had been felt far beyond this single world. Across the galaxy, other Vorthak had sensed what happened here. A human had chosen to protect their young at the cost of his own safety. The network was awakening, and it remembered acts of kindness. 3 weeks after the radiation storm, Hanul noticed the first change. He was collecting soil samples near the eastern ridge when a group of Vorthak appeared from nowhere. They didn't scatter like before. Instead, they formed a loose circle. Around him, their crystalline shells glinting in the orange sunlight. "That's new," muttered Dr. Minho Lee, watching through his binoculars from a safe distance. "They've never done group formations like that." One of the creatures approached Hanul, slowly. In its mandibles, it carried something that looked like a small crystal. The Vorthak set the object down near his feet, backed away, and made a series of soft, chirping sounds. Hanul picked up the crystal. It was warm to the touch and seemed to pulse with its own inner light. "What is this?" he wondered aloud. The Vorthak tilted its head, almost like a curious dog. Then it turned and led the group away, but not before each creature dropped a similar crystal near Hanul's feet. Back at the research station, Dr. Somin Choi ran tests on the crystals. "These are incredible," she said, staring at her scanner. "Readings. They're not just minerals, they're organic compounds that the Vorthak produce in their bodies. Like gifts." "Gifts?" Commander Jiwon Park looked skeptical. "Bugs don't give gifts." "These aren't just bugs," Hanul said quietly. "I think we need to stop calling them that." Over the following days, the behavior became more obvious. Whenever Hanul left the station, groups of Vorthak would appear. They didn't interfere with his work, but they stayed close. When he moved to a new location, they moved too. When he sat down to rest, they arranged themselves in protective patterns around him. "It's like they're guarding you," Minho observed during one of their field trips. "Look how they position themselves." always watching the high ground, the tunnel entrances, anywhere danger might come from. Hanul was beginning to feel unsettled by the attention. The Vorthak were intelligent. That much was clear now. But their behavior suggested something more, complex than simple animal gratitude. The real proof came when research assistant Dabin Ko made a disturbing discovery. He had been studying the Vorthak communication patterns using long-range sensors placed around the colony. "They're talking about you," Dabin announced during the weekly staff meeting. "I mean, really talking, not just chemical signals or basic warnings. They have a specific sound pattern that they use only when discussing your location and activities." He played the recordings for the team. The sounds were strange, musical almost, but definitely structured like a language. "More than that," Dabin continued, "they're sharing this information across vast distances. I've detected the same sound patterns coming from Vorthak groups over 50 kilometers away. Somehow they're all keeping track of where you are and what you're doing." Jiwan frowned. "That's impossible. Our previous studies showed they only communicate within their local colonies." "Our previous studies were wrong," Hanel said. "We weren't looking hard enough. The situation escalated when pirates attacked the mining settlement at Copper Ridge, 200 kilometers south of the research station. The miners sent out a desperate distress call, but the nearest military ship was days away. Hanul insisted on going to help with the medical aid. Against Jiwan's better judgment, she allowed him to take a transport loaded with supplies and accompanied by Minho and Somin. They arrived to find chaos. The pirates had landed 3 ships and were systematically looting the mining equipment. Miners huddled in their shelters while armed raiders moved through the settlement. "We can't do anything against those weapons," Minho said, watching the pirates through binoculars. "We should wait for the military." But Hanul was staring at something else. In the rocks around the settlement, small crystalline shapes were moving. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. "The Vorthak," he whispered. "They followed us here." What happened next would be talked about for years in the outer colonies. The Vorthak attack began without warning. Small groups of creatures emerged from hidden positions throughout the settlement. But they didn't attack the pirates directly. Instead, they went after the equipment. Vorthak swarmed over the pirate ships, their acid saliva eating through weapon systems and engine components. Others targeted the raiders' suits, dissolving specific parts that disabled the life support systems without harming the people inside. Within an hour, every pirate weapon was useless. Their ships couldn't fly. Their armor couldn't protect them. But they were all alive, confused, and completely helpless. "Surrender now," came the voice of the pirate captain over the radio. "Whatever you people did, call it off. We give up." The most shocking part was the precision. No pirate was seriously injured. No vital mining equipment was damaged. The Vorthak had somehow identified exactly what needed to be destroyed and what should be protected. After the pirates were secured and waiting for pickup by colonial security, Hanul walked among the Vorthak groups still scattered around the settlement. They watched him pass but didn't approach. It was clear they had come here because of him, but he had no idea how they knew he needed help. "This changes everything," Somin said, as they prepared to return to the research station. "The Vorthak aren't just intelligent. They're strategically intelligent, and they're protecting humans now, not just their own young." "Not all humans," Minho corrected. "They're protecting people connected to Hanul. The miners said the creatures ignored them completely until we arrived." On the flight back, Hanul stared out at the landscape below. In the fading light, he could see small groups of Vorthak moving across the terrain, all heading in the same direction, all heading toward the research station. "What have I done?" he asked himself. Jiwan was waiting for them when they landed. Her face was grim. "We need to talk," she said. "While you were gone, I received reports from 3 other colonies on this world. They're all seeing the same thing. Vorthak appearing, in large numbers but not attacking. Just watching." Watching for what? For threats to you, apparently. Every settlement that has had contact with our research station now has Vorthak guardians, hundreds of them. The colonists are terrified. That night, Hanul couldn't sleep. He stood at his window, looking out at the landscape bathed in the light of 3 moons. Small crystalline shapes moved in the darkness. Vorthak patrols, circling the station in complex patterns. He had saved their children during the radiation storm. Now they were trying to save him and anyone connected to him, but the implications were terrifying. If the Vorthak were this organized, this widespread, what else were they capable of? In the distance, more shapes appeared on the horizon. Vorthak, from distant colonies, all converging on this one location. All coming to be near the human who had protected their young. Hanil pressed his hand against the window glass. On the other side, a single Vorthak approached and placed one delicate appendage against the same spot. For a moment, human and alien were connected by nothing more than cold metal and glass. But Hanul could have sworn he felt something else. A vast, patient intelligence, ancient beyond measure, that had been waiting for someone like him for a very long time. The bond was forming, and neither species would ever be the same. Dr. Yunji Nam arrived at Research Station Omega-7 on a cold morning when the 3 moons were still visible in the orange sky. She was a communications specialist from the Colonial Science Division, sent to investigate the strange reports about Vorthak behavior. "Show me everything," she told Hanul as they walked toward her temporary laboratory. Behind them, a small group of Vorthak followed at a respectful distance, their crystalline shells catching the morning light. "They do that everywhere I go now," Hanul explained. "At first it was just a few. Now there are hundreds, maybe thousands across the planet." Yunji set up her equipment quickly. She was known throughout the colonies for her work with alien communication systems. If anyone could figure out what the Vorthak were doing, it was her. The first discovery came within hours of starting her scans. "This is impossible," she muttered, staring at her readings. "Hanul, come look at this." The screen showed wave patterns that looked like radio signals, but they weren't coming from any human equipment. The patterns were complex, layered, and definitely artificial. "The Vorthak are broadcasting," Yunji explained, "but not just here. These signals are being repeated by relay stations across the planet. It's like they have their own communication network." Over the next few days, Yunji mapped the network. It was vast, covering every continent on Kepler 438b. But as she dug deeper, she found something that made her hands shake. "The network doesn't stop at this planet," she told the gathered research team. "I'm detecting similar signals from 17 other worlds. 17 people. That's half the human colonies in this sector." Commander Jiwon Park looked pale. "That's not possible. We've never seen Vorthak on other worlds. They're native to this planet only." "Maybe they were never native to just this planet," Hanul said quietly. "Maybe we just never looked hard enough." Dr. Minho Lee pulled up the colonial records on his tablet. "Actually, now that I think about it, there have been reports. Small creatures with crystalline shells on Minerva 7, similar sightings on New Geneva. We always assumed they were different species." "They're not different species," Yunji said. "The signal patterns are identical. Whatever the Vorthak are, they exist across multiple star systems, and they're all connected." The implications were staggering. The creatures they had dismissed as simple insects were actually part of an interstellar network of intelligence. But why had they revealed themselves now? The answer came from an unexpected source. Captain Kyung-Soo Han of the UEF vessel Determination sent an urgent message to the research station. His ship had been on routine patrol near the edge of human space when something unprecedented happened. "We found them in our ventilation system," Kyung-Soo reported over the video link. His usual calm demeanor was shaken. "Small crystalline creatures, just like you described. They appeared overnight. No idea how they got aboard." "Did they cause any damage?" Jiwon asked. "That's the strange part. They didn't harm anything or anyone, but they left behind these crystal formations throughout the ship. Our engineers ran tests, and you're not going to believe this. Our sensor array efficiency has increased by 300%. Our engines are running smoother than they ever have. It's like they upgraded our entire ship. Similar reports began flooding in from across human space. Vorthak were appearing on ships, space stations, and colonies where they had never been seen before. They didn't attack or interfere. They helped. Ship systems improved. Colony infrastructure became more efficient. Medical equipment started healing. People faster than ever before. But perhaps the most disturbing report came from Dr. Ji-Hyun Wang on the research vessel Explorer. The creatures aren't traveling by any method we understand, Ji-Hyun explained during an emergency conference call. We've been tracking their appearances, and the timeline doesn't work. They're showing up simultaneously on worlds that are hundreds of light years apart. Even if they had faster-than-light travel, they couldn't coordinate like this. Yunji had been working around the clock to understand the Vorthak communication network. Her latest discovery kept her awake at night. They're not communicating through space, she announced to the team. They're communicating through dimensions we can't even detect. The signals I've been tracking don't follow the normal rules of physics. They arrive instantly, regardless of distance. What does that mean? Somin asked. It means the Vorthak network might be bigger than we thought. Much bigger. As if responding to her words, every Vorthak on the planet suddenly stopped what they were doing and turned toward the research station. Thousands of crystalline creatures across hundreds of kilometers all oriented themselves in the same direction, at exactly the same moment. Did you see that? Minho whispered, watching through the station windows. The Vorthak began to move, not in random patterns like before, but in precise formations. They flowed across the landscape like living rivers of crystal, all converging on specific locations around the research station. Within hours, they had formed geometric patterns that were visible from orbit. Complex designs that looked almost like circuit boards with the research station at the center. They're building something, Hanil realized. But what? The answer came when Yunji's equipment registered a massive spike in the dimensional communication signals. The patterns the Vorthak had formed on the ground were acting like amplifiers, boosting the network's power by incredible amounts. The signal is reaching beyond our galaxy now, Yunji reported, her voice barely a whisper. Whatever message they're sending, it's going further than we ever thought possible. That night, Hanul stood outside the station, despite the dangerous radiation levels. The Vorthak formations glowed softly in the darkness, pulsing with rhythmic light. Around him, individual creatures approached and touched their appendages to his hands, his arms, his face. He could feel something changing inside himself. Not painful, but definitely different. His thoughts seemed clearer, more connected to something vast and patient. "What are you?" he asked aloud. The nearest Vorthak made a sound he had never heard before. Not a chirp or click, but something almost like words. And somehow, impossibly, he understood the meaning. "We are the Guardians. We have been waiting. Now we remember. Why?" The network was fully awake now, and it was reaching out across the galaxy. But reaching out to what? And more importantly, what would reach back? As Hanul walked back toward the station, he didn't notice that his shadow on the ground was moving independently of his body, or that his eyes now reflected light in ways that human eyes never should. Admiral Tae-hyun Yoon sat in his command chair aboard the battleship New Seoul, staring at reports that made no sense. As head of the Human Defense Coalition's intelligence division, he had seen strange things before, but this was different. "Show me the Hegemony Patrol data again," he ordered his aide, Lieutenant Bora Shin. The holographic display lit up with the tracking information of alien warships. The Hegemony was a collection of 7 predator species that had controlled this part of the galaxy for thousands of years. They were ruthless, efficient, and considered humans to be nothing more than potential livestock. For the past 6 months, they had been probing human defenses, testing for weaknesses. Their massive ships regularly appeared at the edge of human space, scanned the colonies, and disappeared again. Everyone knew they were planning an invasion, but something had changed 3 weeks ago. "Here's the Patterson System incident," Bora said, highlighting a section of the display. Hegemony battle group of 12 ships entered the system as usual, but this time, they didn't leave. What happened to them? Unknown. They just stopped transmitting. When our patrol arrived, there was no wreckage, no energy signatures, nothing. 12 massive warships vanished without a trace. Similar incidents were happening throughout human space. Hegemony forces were disappearing, not retreating, not being destroyed in battle, simply vanishing. "Sir," called Communications Officer Young-Ho Park from his station, "we're receiving a transmission from the Hegemony flagship Eternal Hunger. Admiral Vorthek wants to speak with you directly." Tae-hyun straightened in his chair. The Hegemony never communicated with humans except to issue demands for surrender. The alien face that appeared on the screen was terrifying even by Hegemony standards. Admiral Vorthek belonged to the razor claw species, with metallic teeth and eyes like burning coals. He had personally commanded the conquest of 47 different worlds. "Human Admiral," Vorthek spoke in heavily accented but clear human language. "We demand answers. Your species is using weapons we do not understand. This violates the ancient laws of warfare." "I don't know what you're talking about," Tae-hyun replied honestly. "We haven't attacked any of your ships." "Lies." Vorthek's voice was filled with rage. "My fleets are being destroyed by invisible enemies. They strike without warning, disable our weapons, then vanish. Only humans possess such cowardice." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Tae-hyun and his crew in stunned silence. "Sir," Bora said quietly, "we need to contact the research stations. If something is protecting us from the hegemony, we need to know what it is." The answer came from Dr. Soon-hee Kang, the Coalition's chief xenobiologist. She had been studying the Vorthak reports from multiple worlds and had reached a terrifying conclusion. "The Vorthak network has identified the hegemony as a threat," she explained during an emergency council meeting. "Based on the pattern of disappearances, they're systematically eliminating any force that poses a danger to human colonies." General Wonjin Lim, head of Coalition military forces, leaned forward in his chair. "You're telling me that insects are fighting a war on our behalf?" "They're not insects," Sun-hee replied firmly. "The data from 17 worlds shows coordinated military action on a scale we've never seen before. The Vorthak are using tactics that our best strategists couldn't devise." She brought up tactical displays showing the hegemony ship disappearances. "Look at the pattern. They're not attacking randomly. They're targeting command ships first, cutting off communications, then systematically disabling the rest of the fleet. It's brilliant." "But how?" asked Defense Minister Hee-jin Ko. "Hegemony ships have shields, weapons, armor. They've conquered entire star systems." "That's what makes this so terrifying," Sun-hee continued. "The Vorthak aren't using conventional weapons. Survivors from the few hegemony ships that escaped report attacks by crystal shadows that phase through solid matter. They disable specific systems without damaging others. It's surgical precision on an impossible scale." Meanwhile, on Kepler 438b, Hanul was experiencing changes he didn't understand. The Vorthak around the research station had grown more active, their crystalline shells pulsing with strange rhythms, and he was beginning to sense those rhythms in his own body. "You've been exposed to their biosignatures for months now," Dr. Yoonji Nam explained during one of her examinations. "Your brain chemistry is adapting to match their communication frequencies." "What does that mean?" "It means you're becoming part of their network. You can sense their collective emotional state, their intentions, their fears." She paused, looking at her scanner readings. "And they're very afraid right now." "Afraid of what?" Before Yoonji could answer, alarms began blaring throughout the research station. Commander Ji-won Park's voice came over the intercom. All personnel to emergency stations. We have multiple contacts entering the system. In the command center, they watched as 17 massive ships appeared on the scanner display. Hegemony dreadnoughts, each one capable of destroying an entire planet. They found us, Ji-won said grimly. This is Admiral Vorthek's revenge fleet. But Hanul wasn't looking at the ships. He was looking at the ground outside, where thousands of Vorthak were emerging from underground tunnels. They moved in patterns he had never seen before, forming complex geometries across the landscape. They're preparing for battle, he said. What can insects do against dreadnoughts? Minho asked. The answer came quickly. As the hegemony ships descended toward the planet's surface, reality began to bend around them. Space itself seemed to twist, creating pockets of distorted gravity that pulled the massive vessels off course. The Vorthak weren't using weapons. They were manipulating the fundamental forces of physics. Impossible, whispered Soman, watching the display. They're creating localized space-time distortions. The energy requirements should be astronomical. One by one, the hegemony ships found themselves trapped in gravity wells that shouldn't exist. Their weapons fired uselessly into empty space, as the Vorthak shifted the ships into parallel dimensions just enough to make them untouchable. Within an hour, 17 of the most powerful warships in known space were floating helplessly in orbit. Their crews alive but completely powerless. Admiral Vorthek's final transmission was filled with something none of them had ever heard from a hegemony warrior before. Fear! What are you humans? He demanded. What have you awakened? But Hanul was no longer entirely sure they were still human. The changes in his body were accelerating. His thoughts were connecting to the vast Vorthak network, and through it, he could sense the scope of what was happening. The network stretched across multiple galaxies. The creatures on thousands of worlds were all part of a single, unimaginably large organism. And that organism had been sleeping until he saved those larvae during the radiation storm. Now it was fully awake, and it had decided that humanity was worth protecting. What have we become part of? He asked himself, feeling his consciousness expand to touch minds on distant stars. The answer came from the network itself, speaking directly into his thoughts in a voice older than human civilization. You have become our chosen guardians, and we have become yours. The ancient enemy stirs in the void between galaxies. The real war is about to begin. Outside, the Vorthak patterns were changing again. This time, they weren't preparing for defense. They were preparing for something much larger. Humanity had gained protectors more powerful than they could imagine, but the price of that protection was becoming clear. They were no longer fighting their own battles, and soon they might not be entirely human anymore. Historian Do-hyun Lim had always been fascinated by dead civilizations. His office on New Terra was filled with artifacts and records from species that had vanished long before humans reached the stars. But it was an old stone tablet from the Quellan ruins that changed everything. The tablet showed primitive drawings of small crystalline creatures. Beneath them were symbols that roughly translated to the Guardians of the Chosen. The Quellan had disappeared over 3,000 years ago, leaving behind empty cities and no explanation for their fate. This can't be a coincidence, Do-hyun muttered, pulling up similar records from his database. The pattern was there once he knew to look for it. 17 different extinct civilizations spread across the galaxy, all with similar stories in their final records. Small crystal creatures that appeared during times of crisis. Civilizations that were protected by mysterious forces. And then, silence. But there were other stories too. Civilizations that had driven away the crystal creatures, that had hunted them or tried to destroy them. Those species had vanished completely, erased so thoroughly that even their planets showed no signs they had ever existed. Do-hyun sent his findings to every research station in human space. The response was immediate and terrifying. On Kepler 438b, Hanel read the historian's report with growing unease. The Vorthak around him seemed to sense his mood. They gathered closer, their shells pulsing with soft, calming colors. "We need to understand what we're dealing with," he told Dr. Nam. "If the Vorthak are some kind of test, what happens if we fail?" Yunji had been working on translating the complex signals that flowed through the Vorthak network. Her latest breakthrough was both fascinating and frightening. "They're not just communicating," she explained to the research team. "They're sharing memories, experiences, knowledge. The entire network is like a single massive brain." "How massive?" asked Commander Jiwan Park. "Galactic scale, maybe larger. Every Vorthak that has ever existed is still part of the network. They don't really die the way we understand death. Their consciousness just merges with the collective." Dr. Minho Lee looked pale. "You're saying they're immortal?" "Functionally, yes. And they've been recording everything that happens in this galaxy for millions of years. They remember every species they've encountered, every choice those species made, every outcome. On the industrial world of New Osaka, engineer Yuna Park made a discovery that sent shockwaves through the colonial administration. While inspecting the main power grid, she found Vorthak biotechnology integrated into the system's core components. "It's been here for weeks," she reported to the planetary governor. "Maybe months, growing through the infrastructure like living circuits. But here's the strange part. Everything is running better than ever. Power efficiency is up 300%, and we haven't had a single system failure." Similar discoveries were happening on every human world. The Vorthak weren't just protecting humanity from external threats, they were quietly improving human technology, making colonies more efficient, healing systems that were broken. But intelligence officer Jihoon Kim found something that terrified the coalition leadership. "The improvements aren't random," he reported during a classified briefing. "They're preparing us for something. Look at the pattern. Better engines, stronger shields, more efficient weapons systems. It's like they're upgrading humanity for war." "War against what?" asked General Wanjin Lim. Jihoon brought up astronomical data that made everyone in the room go silent. "Long-range sensors are detecting massive energy signatures moving through intergalactic space. Something is coming, and it's bigger than anything we've ever seen." The answer to what was approaching came from an unexpected source. On the research vessel Deep Explorer, xenoarchaeologist Dr. Sora Chung was studying ancient ruins on a dead world when she found a chamber filled with crystal formations. As she approached, the crystals began to glow. Images filled her mind. Not her own memories, but those of the long-dead Vorthak who had lived on this world millions of years ago. She saw the galaxy as it once was, filled with thousands of thriving civilizations. She saw the arrival of something that existed in the spaces between realities. Entities of pure entropy that consumed not just matter and energy, but information itself. They erased civilization so completely that it was as if they had never existed. "The Devourers," she whispered, understanding the concept that had been placed in her mind. The Vorthak network had been created as a defense against these entities. Every time the Devourers awakened from their cosmic slumber, the Vorthak tested the species in the galaxy to find those capable of standing against them. Most species failed through cruelty, selfishness, or simple indifference to others, but occasionally a species showed the spark of something greater: compassion, self-sacrifice, the willingness to risk everything to protect others. Humanity had passed the test when Hanel saved the Vorthak larvae during the radiation storm. Now they were being prepared for the real battle. Back on Kepler 438b, Haniel felt his connection to the network growing stronger every day. He could sense Vorthak minds across thousands of worlds, all focused on the same urgent preparation. "How long do we have?" he asked the network directly. The answer came as a mixture of images and emotions. Massive shapes moving through the void between galaxies. Ancient hunger awakening after eons of dormancy. Time measured not in years, but in the slow decay of distant stars. Soon. was the simple reply. That night, Hanaul stood outside the research station despite the dangerous radiation. The landscape around him had changed completely. What had once been barren rock was now covered in living crystal formations that pulsed with their own light. The Vorthak weren't just living on this planet anymore. They were transforming it into something new, and they were transforming him as well. His reflection in the station windows showed changes that should have frightened him. His eyes now held flecks of crystalline light. His skin had taken on a slight translucent quality. When he moved, reality seemed to bend slightly around him. "What am I becoming?" he asked aloud. The answer came from within his own transformed mind, in a voice that was both his own and something infinitely larger. "You are becoming what you need to be, the bridge between what humanity was and what it must become to survive, what is coming." In the distance, more lights appeared in the sky. Not stars, but ships, hundreds of them, carrying humans from across the galaxy who had been chosen by the Vorthak network. Scientists, engineers, soldiers, artists, all of them showing the early signs of the same transformation that was changing Hanaul. The real war was about to begin, and humanity was about to discover that survival came with a price they had never imagined paying. They would save the galaxy, but they would no longer be entirely human when they did it. And somewhere in the space between realities, ancient enemies that had destroyed countless civilizations were beginning to wake up. The Devourers arrived without warning on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. Captain Wu Jin Co. was drinking coffee on the bridge of the hybrid vessel Unity when every alarm in the ship began screaming at once. "Contact!" reported Navigator Haina Kim, her voice tight with controlled fear. "Multiple contacts, size unknown. They're too big for our sensors to measure properly." Through the view screen, space itself seemed to be tearing open. Dark shapes emerged from wounds in reality, each one larger than entire star systems. They moved with purpose, consuming light itself as they passed, leaving trails of absolute nothingness. "Behind them!" "Those are the Devourers," Wu Jin said, feeling the knowledge flow into his mind from the Vorthak network that was now part of his consciousness. "Everything we've been preparing for leads to this moment. The Unity was one of 50 hybrid ships that represented the new alliance between humanity and the Vorthak network. The vessel was alive in ways that normal ships could never be, its crystalline hull pulsing with organic rhythms, its engines powered by forces that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Back on Kepler 438b, Hanaul stood in what had once been the research station, but was now something between a command center and a living organism. Crystalline walls pulsed with information from across the galaxy as millions of Vorthak minds coordinated their response to the ancient threat. "How do we fight something that exists in 17 dimensions at once?" asked Dr. Yunji Nam, though her question was directed as much to the network as to any individual person. The answer came from the collective consciousness that now included thousands of transformed humans and billions of Vorthak across hundreds of worlds. "We don't fight them in normal space. We fight them in the spaces between realities, where they are vulnerable." The war that followed was unlike anything in recorded history. Human creativity and adaptability merged with Vorthak quantum consciousness and dimensional manipulation created weapons that existed as pure mathematics, strategies that unfolded across multiple timelines simultaneously, and battles fought in realms where the normal laws of physics held no meaning. Captain Wu Jin found himself commanding not just his ship, but entire fleets that existed in parallel dimensions. His consciousness stretched across space and time, coordinating attacks with versions of himself that had made different choices in alternate realities. The Devourers were ancient beyond measure, but they had never faced anything like transformed humanity before. Where other species had fought them with conventional weapons and predictable tactics, humans approached the problem from directions the Devourers had never encountered. "They expect us to fight for survival," Wu Jin realized. during a battle that took place in 7 dimensions simultaneously. They don't understand that we're fighting to protect others. Engineer Una Park, now more crystal than flesh, worked with living machines that rebuilt themselves during combat. Her consciousness flowed through the Unity's systems, making split-second adjustments that kept them one step ahead of entropy weapons that could erase entire sections of reality. "The Devourers consume information," she reported to the network. "But they can't consume something that changes faster than they can process." This became humanity's greatest weapon. Their unpredictability, their refusal to accept limitations, their ability to find hope in impossible situations. The Vorthak network provided the power and coordination, but it was human stubbornness that turned the tide. The final battle took place simultaneously across 17 different realities. Haniel found himself standing in a space that existed between dimensions, facing a devourer that appeared as a constantly shifting void in the shape of consciousness itself. "Why do you resist?" the entity asked in a voice that was the sound of civilizations dying. "All things must end. All information must be consumed. This is the natural order." "Because we choose to resist," Haniel replied, his voice carrying the weight of every human who had ever refused to give up in the face of impossible odds. "That's what makes us human." The battle lasted microseconds and millennia simultaneously. When it ended, the Devourers were not destroyed. They were transformed. Their hunger for entropy changed into something else, something that created rather than consumed. But victory came with a price that no one had fully understood until it was too late. Haniel stood on what had once been Kepler 438b, looking up at a sky filled with living light. The planet was no longer rock and atmosphere, but something between matter and consciousness, a node in a network that stretched across multiple galaxies. He tried to remember what it had felt like to be purely human, but the memories seemed distant and strange. His consciousness now touched billions of other minds across space and time. He could feel the birth of new stars, the dreams of alien children on distant worlds, the slow thoughts of gas giants as they pondered the meaning of existence. "Are we still human?" asked a voice that might have been Dr. Yunji Nam, though she existed now as a pattern of crystalline thought rather than flesh and blood. The question rippled through the network, touching every transformed human consciousness. The answer came not in words, but in the feeling of a child's laughter, the memory of sunrise over Earth's oceans, the stubborn refusal to give up that had characterized humanity since their first days in caves. "We are what humanity becomes when it refuses to be limited by what it was," Haniel replied. The galaxy was safe now. The Devourers had been transformed into gardeners, nurturing new forms of life rather than consuming existing ones. Entire civilizations that had been erased from existence were slowly being restored as the network remembered them back into reality. But the price of this victory was becoming clear to the unchanged humans who remained on distant worlds. When they looked up at the night sky, they could sometimes see the crystalline lights of the transformed moving between stars, beautiful and terrible, no longer quite the species they had once been. "They saved us all," whispered a child on New Earth, watching the lights dance across the heavens. But what did they become? The answer came from Haniel's consciousness, touching the child's dreams with gentle reassurance. "We became what we needed to become. We are still your guardians, still your protectors. We are still human where it matters, most in our hearts." But even as he sent that comfort, Haniel knew the truth was more complex. They had saved the galaxy by transcending their original nature. They were human in spirit, but no longer in form or function. The wild spaces of the galaxy watched the transformed humans with a mixture of gratitude and fear. They had stopped the Devourers, ended an ancient threat that had plagued the cosmos for eons. But now there was a new power in the galaxy, a fusion of human determination and cosmic consciousness that operated on scales beyond normal comprehension. The wild had learned to fear what it had helped create, and in the spaces between stars, Hanul and his transformed companions continued. Their work, gardening reality itself, protecting civilizations that would never know their names, ensuring that the galaxy would always have guardians watching over it. They had become something beyond human and alien, something new and strange, and wonderful and terrible. They had become what came next, and the universe would never be the same.